Well, welcome. Thank you so much for coming along today. I'm really excited to sort of be here and speaking, and love it when we have a group roughly this size. I always find this is just like way more nice to kind of talk to people, and it's always like a nice chill vibe. So yeah, that's always really good. This is Sustainability Trust, so I assume that a lot of you probably know it, but if you don't, then I'll sort of introduce a little bit about what we do shortly as well, so you can kind of get to know the space, and afterwards you're welcome to have a look around the shop and things like that, so yeah, if you didn't already. Bit of housekeeping, I suppose, before we begin. If you need to go to the toilet, they're just at the end down there through the doors, and then you just like keep going down the hallway. If there's any sort of crazy events, this is Wellington, so if we have an earthquake or anything, then we shoot up the road and meet at the War Memorial, which is also a tsunami-free zone or safe zone, so that's all good. And in terms of, just thinking anything else, we are recording today, of course, but it's not visible, like none of you are visible, so that should be fine. I have asked my colleague to come in and take some photos later, so just let me know if you're not okay with that, and she'll make sure that she gets some photos, but without you guys in it, so that's fine too. But welcome. I'm really excited to talk to you today about sustainability and sort of sustainability really in the arts. I've got in theatre, but really it's kind of more broad than that. So that's cool, we can kind of kick into it. So yeah, sort of as I mentioned, this is Sustainability Trust. We do a huge range of variety of things, everything from working with individuals such as through our eco-store where you can go and buy products for your home that are sort of sustainably focused, right through to working with schools and businesses and government and other organisations, and sort of for us it's all about sort of making sustainability accessible and trying to just like improve people's capacity to live sustainably in Wellington, which is pretty cool. I'm from the Sustainable Enterprise Solutions team, but there's sort of a variety of the things we do, so yeah. Just sort of an outline for today. This is really what we're going to go through, so I'll start with just talking a little bit of a reminder about like why we want to be sustainable, like what we're sort of here for, and why that's relevant for the arts. And then we'll go into the key areas of influence. So there's a couple of sort of high impact areas that we've sort of picked out to talk to about today. This is obviously just the starting 1 hour talk, so there's obviously each of these you could talk to for like hours on end. So this is just to like, you know, kind of get those creative juices going and have a think about what might apply to you in your different roles, and we'll get into that in the form of a workshop at the end as well. But before we get there, we will be doing a little bit on communicating sustainability. So just thinking about some of the stuff to consider like as a group, like if you're sort of organising a show or some sort of arts event going on, but then also what you can consider sort of your influence that you have on your audience, regardless of whether that's like a physical audience in a theatre or whether that might be people walking through a gallery looking at arts and that sort of thing. So audience being quite a broad word that I'm using today. Outcomes, understand why sustainability is important. Appreciate systems thinking for sustainability. We'll get into a little bit of what that means shortly. Identify those sort of key areas of impact that I mentioned before, how to communicate to different audiences, and then hopefully come away feeling a little bit more empowered with a few more ideas of what you could do in your different roles for the arts. But to get started, so why is sustainability important? We are here today talking about it for a reason. And essentially it really comes down to this, which is that we really rely on the environment, but we consume way too much. I mean, it's pretty obvious, but really everything that we do, all of the products that we are around, the things that we sit on, you know, the things that we eat, really in some way, shape or form come back to the environment. Like we source everything from the environment. And so while that's all great, typically the way that we extract materials and resources is really we're doing it at such a scale that it's not really sustainable. At some point we're either going to run out or we're going to sort of like deplenish and ruin those resources so that we can't really take from them anymore. And of course that is a problem, we don't want that. And so it's really important to be thinking about, well, what does that mean for me, and like what can I be doing to sort of like help minimise that, and sort of think about how do we use resources in a way that we're not going to have that problem in the future. And in fact, if you actually are aware, at the rate that we currently consume resources, you would need 1.75 Earths to actually sustain everything that we do at the moment on Earth. And that's considering the whole population, and if you look at a high income country like a place like New Zealand, it's actually much higher. So you're looking at somewhere between 3 and 7 Earths is what we would need to sustain the way that we live here in New Zealand, for example. So pretty heavy impact, and definitely something that we need to work on. Today, of course, I'm just going to focus on sort of two elements of that. One is that we want to sort of think about the amount of waste that we produce, and the second one being emissions, which are really two key areas, but there's a lot you can always go into. The first thing about waste is essentially that, as I mentioned, we use resources for the different activities that we do, and then it's sort of either one of two things happens. We either have waste that is a result of the products that we buy, so things like packaging that comes with it, or the things that we're using reach the end of their life and then we'll put them in a bin and they'll go to landfill. That system is a little bit silly for a number of reasons. And the first thing I just want to talk to you about a little bit is landfills themselves. So essentially, when things get sent to landfill, obviously you've got a lot of materials that are not going to break down. So things that are really long lasting. Plastics is obviously the prime example. But the other thing that happens is that they can break down somewhat, but often into smaller parts. So they're not being like reabsorbed by the environment, they're just like staying in the ground somewhere. And when they break down into smaller parts, you get things like microplastics, which can then go on to pollute other areas. And we do now know that plastics in particular are something that have essentially infiltrated like almost every environment on the planet. There's very few environments left that don't have some marker of plastics that are there. So they do break down into these microplastics, and they are quite a big problem. And the other thing that happens is that when products or anything goes to landfill, they also produce a massive source of methane gases, which are one of the greenhouse gases that contribute to climate change. And a report actually just came out last week to say that a lot of the things that we've been using to calculate what that looks like have actually been sort of underestimating how much methane is being produced. So we already know that that's quite a big area of impact. In fact, if you look at food waste, just as an example, food waste on its own, if you assumed that food waste was sort of a country, it would actually be like the third largest emitter of methane in the world, behind the States and China. So massive area of impact. And of course, a lot of what goes into landfill though is actually recyclable. So it's either recyclable or it's compostable, or it could be used in another way and sort of have that alternative life. It doesn't need to be out in the environment, sort of being something that's sitting waiting to pollute. And then finally, there's this aspect that a lot of people often forget about, which is also the social aspect of landfills. I mean, they're smelly, they pollute groundwater, they're kind of ugly, like, you know, they're just something that we don't really want to have sitting around. And it's not as big a problem in places like New Zealand, but certainly there are plenty of examples overseas where there have been, like, you know, people taking government like to court over like groundwater issues, and like people being poisoned essentially by landfills that breach, and then, you know, that pollution gets out. So they're a big problem, and certainly not something that we want to make a bigger problem in New Zealand either. And so what I do want to give you is this example here. You might be familiar with it. In 2019, we had the Fox Glacier landfill breach in the west coast of the South Island. Major event. So this is just some images that came from that. And the cleanup itself took a very long time. In fact, it's probably not done, but I'm not sure if it's like an official done date. And it cost about $3 million to try and clean up that effort. But the reality is there's still going to be rubbish down there like for decades. It's not something that you can just clean up and make disappear. I really like the example of the Jif bottle. Like, it's something that is easy to sort of think about, like yourselves at home or like at work or whatever. When you have a product and you put it in the bin, and at some point somebody, you know, well-meaningly put this Jif bottle into a bin and it went to landfill, and 30 years later here we are and it's still there and someone else is now cleaning it up. And so this is just really a wild thing, isn't it? Like, it's a wild like system that we've somehow built for ourselves, and it's something that we definitely want to move away from. But why is this all relevant to the arts then? Like, why are you here thinking about what you can do from an arts perspective? Well, really, it's just because, and I'm sort of going to focus more on waste today than emissions, but as I mentioned, it'll be a little bit of both. It's really because the arts is an example of an area where you're dealing with materials a lot of the time in different ways, and so it's really good if we can start being like conscious about where those materials come from, what you're using in the arts, and like how can we change that to be something that's more sustainable, particularly in the sense of any sort of like once-off things, like things are like a show that you do once or maybe a couple of times in a season, and then like what happens to the things that you're using after that. Is there a way that we can sort of do this better and do this more sustainably? An example here, you know, a single large show can produce 2 tons of waste in a single night. That fact was from, I think it was an M&M concert that happened in Wellington a couple of years ago, which is like massive, and that excludes, like that doesn't even include if you think about like the rehearsals that go behind that fact, and this was just from one night of show, like the audience and impact and things like that. So pretty big and a pretty big impact to be had. So what I want to do now is kind of just, before we get into, you know, what are the things that you can do to sort of help this problem, I want to take you through this, which is an example of systems thinking. So I mentioned this before, I don't know if one of you have heard it at all, no? So systems thinking is about looking at not just like one particular activity that you might do, but it's looking at the activity in the context of other things that are going on as well. We typically talk with businesses a lot about this, so this is somewhat model in businesses, but it's very applicable to a lot of different examples. And so in any particular process that we have, either a process or a project that you might be running, an event or a business, you've got sort of these elements. You've got the things that you're going to put into it, so your inputs. And you've got to have like your operations, you've got your systems, your processes, the things that you do with your inputs and the way that they all like run together, and then you'll have your outputs. So your products, your services, your waste management at the end. And then we sort of have this bit at the end here, which is kind of a tag on, but we really want that to be incorporated throughout it. We just haven't worked out a way to really like put that in, which is about restoration and offsetting. So trying to find ways to make all of these like restorative for the environment. In terms of systems thinking, the key thing to think here is that sustainability has often been focused on this element here. It's been focused on like the waste management side. It's like, how do we recycle? Like we've got all this waste, how do we recycle it? And we're sort of turning a blind eye to the fact that the waste itself comes from this element. It's like your inputs. It's the things that you've started with in the design phase. And so as we go through today and some of the topics and ideas that I'm going to talk to you about, I just want you to keep this in mind, that sustainability is about good design, and it's about what you're doing at the start of a process, not necessarily just managing what happens at the end. So I would like to start with venues as a topic today, and I'm going to come at this from sort of a particular angle. There's obviously the people who are the people who run the venues, or like the venue managers and things, but then there's also the perspective of if you're picking a venue. The latter is sort of the perspective I'm going to look at today, but if you are sort of in the venue space and have some influence in them, then anything like any of these are relevant to like include in your sustainability policy, for example, and things like that. But what I want to start with is the first thing to think about when you are looking at a venue is to consider things like the reusable culture. So do they have facilities, and do they make it possible for you to move away from single-use items and into like reusables? Do they have like the kitchen facilities that would be needed to do that en masse? Thinking about how can we make it possible to not actually have lots of like cups or single-use plates or whatever it is that's going through. And a really cool example of this being achieved up in Auckland is with Splore. You might be familiar with them. It's an example of quite a big festival really, but 7,000 people, and they use 15,000 Globlet cups. Globlet is a reusable cup provider, and eliminated 35,000 disposable cups in a year. So I mean, like over the course of years, you're using the same 15,000 cups, but you're like, you know, preventing a whole lot of waste, which is really cool. And then even more locally here in Wellington, this image was sent to us by the organisers for Cooper Duper, but it was one that was at a Matariki event where they were using reusable bowls. I'm not sure if you might be familiar, might have seen them around. They're quite popular here now. So that's a really important thing to consider. Secondly, looking at sustainable catering. So along a similar train of thought, you know, like, does a venue provide sustainable catering? So can they do zero waste? Can they be plastic free? And can they do sort of dietary requirements that have a lower footprint? So we typically say that vegetarian and vegan diets have a lower carbon footprint than ones with meat. So considering that as well. That's of course if you're catering. If it's just a small event, or you're just buying for your team, or you know, some other thing like that, then you don't need catering. But another thing to consider would be like, can you go to a refillery and take your own boxes with you and get some snacks that way, rather than like buying things in plastic and buying things with packaging. Number 3 is power and energy, which I have an image for. So power and energy in terms of events, indoor events anyway, typically is quite high because we're using lighting and things that are not just your LED like light bulb from the office. So it ends up being quite a big area of impact. And so working in a way that you can try and reduce that really is about making sure that you are doing what you can to sort of keep lighting and equipment that's fairly modern, just because it's slightly more energy efficient. And also this is something that I pulled from a resource from the Greater London Authority, who did sort of a resource on like green theatre. And it was really cool because they demonstrate how much like carbon savings you can have just by focusing. This was just one example from lighting, and it was like between 9 and 12% can come just from that for a venue. But they had a whole lot of other examples of like things to consider and the carbon saving that could come from that for a venue space. The Greater London Authority. At the very end, I've got the list of resources, and I'll get that distributed so that you guys can all find that really easily. Here in New Zealand, this is an example you guys may even be more familiar. You might have heard of Marcus McShane, so he's pretty cool. He's done some like really intense like stuff on sustainability, and in oh yes, okay. This image I pulled from Heat back in 2008. Yeah, and it sounds just so cool how he like went touring around with his container that was like powered by solar and wind, which is just a really cool thing to know. Like, you know, this is possible. Might take a bit of coordination, but at the same time, when you think about the fact that we are in a transitional space, like we need those people who are those early adopters to kind of show us that it's possible. And so, you know, being able to like speak to people like this is really cool. He also contributed to the Green Theatre book, or the Green Theatre Guide that you've been just like shown. So yeah, he's a pretty cool person. The next thing is venue location. So this is something I'm actually going to get into really later, but this is more in terms of considering how people will reach your venue and sort of adopting methods of sustainable transport. And the key thing that I want to make clear here is that the facilities that you have on site make a big difference to how people adopt things like active transport options. So if you have a bike stand, way more likely to have people biking in because they're going to feel safe to have their bike. Same with, you know, if you want people to walk or run in, this is something that we often say to officers, but if you want people to walk or run in, maybe have shower facilities, because the reality is, you know, people don't want to like do that and then be all sweaty. And things like lockers as well, so that people have a place that they can put their things safely and feel like they're not going to be stolen and things like that. But that all makes a really big difference to the way that people adopt sustainable behaviours, is making sure that you've got those facilities in place to actually adopt them. So that's something else to consider when you are looking at the venue spaces. You know, what do they offer that's going to be helpful for like getting your audience on board with actually coming along in a sustainable way. Coming back to waste management, the sort of key thing I wanted to say here was obviously we do want to focus on reducing consumption. You sort of want to reduce the waste that you have in the first place rather than have to manage it, but we still live in the system that we live in, and so it's important to consider that as well. So really the key thing here is like try to make sure not everything is just going to go to landfill, and try and find a venue that sort of has the contractors in place to do things like organics or like recycling and all of those normal things. If they don't, and if they like aren't willing to or can't for some reason, particularly for things like organics, consider what other partnerships you can create. So meeting up, for example, with like composting hubs, like community compost hubs, who might be willing to do like a once-off for an event or that sort of thing, and might be able to like give you the bins and stuff to sort of make that composting happen. And the thing I'll add there as well is really just about considering, like do a bit of an analysis of where you think the waste is going to come from. Like if you are someone who's selling like merchandise, for example, and your merchandise is all, you know, packaged in plastic, then like you're making money from selling merchandise, but then you're spending money on the waste management. So it's kind of like a little bit ironic at the same time. Hello, welcome, join us. No, totally fine, totally fine. So just some of those things are really good to consider as well. It's like have a look at where your waste has come from. Finally, I'm just going to finish with sort of real brief like outdoor considerations. fairly obvious, a lot of them, but ultimately, like if you are having an outdoor event or doing things outside, the things that you want to think about are the things that are disturbing to nature. So lighting, sound, obviously they're all in some way have like environmental disturbances, but you also want to consider things like if people are going to be bringing like rubbish or things with them to your event or to the space that you're in. You know, is it possible that those things could fly away, particularly in Wellington, and end up in a local waterway somewhere? Like, are there other impacts that you might have that you sort of didn't think about, and consider them as well? You may actually already know this, but there is a Wellington bylaw that means that for events outside over 1,000 people, you have to have your waste management plan in place, and encourage you to kind of think about that from an ecological perspective, like what is the ecology of the area and like how is your event going to impact that. So really important thing. I also will just add in there, it doesn't have to be 1,000 people for you to do that plan. You know, like you could just choose to do that plan like at smaller scale as well. So that brings me to part 2, which is looking at sets and costumes. For this, this is mostly going to be, again, sort of looking at that waste perspective, and there's a few sort of key things to keep in mind here. Just going to refer my notes really quickly. Cool, yeah. So the first thing I want to say is really about embracing the reuse and share culture. This is already something I'd say is fairly big in the arts. You know, like you can go and get like costumes from places. You wouldn't necessarily like buy them all brand new and then throw them out. But making that like possible sort of at scale and making that sort of that share or reuse economy at scale is something that we want to think about. How can we make that possible for other people? Not just because it helps us not throw things out, but it also helps other people do the same. Like if you're giving them something, you've stopped them from having to go buy new things and like produce any more waste as well. And so there's like this sort of double whammy effect of when you're sharing something, it's like, you know, you have not wasted it and they have not wasted it, and it's great. And really, you know, we do say, and I'll sort of get into it next, that obviously it's good to be thinking about sustainable materials when you're making things like sets and costumes, but really, you know, a lot of the things that we've already got. Like if we've already got, you know, costumes made of polyester, then we've already got them. So we don't need to necessarily swap them out until they reach the end of their life. We should keep those things in use and keep those things from going to landfill and from being thrown out. There are some good examples sort of coming through at the moment. You may be aware of Urban Dream Brokerage. They are sort of working on getting spaces in Wellington so that we have more places for like people to put their sets there and then like have a space almost as a little bit of storage, but like to make sure they can be reused and repurposed. Auckland Community Recycling Centre is another example doing a similar thing. And we somewhat do it actually at the Trust. We have the curtain bank, so we accept old but good condition curtains, and then we sort of find them new homes with low-income families in housing in Wellington, which is really cool too. So making sure things get a second life is the key thing to keep in mind. And then of course I've mentioned materials. So you know, where you are going to buy new or where you are looking to create something new, see what materials are available that are sustainable. In particular, fabrics, so you know, for costumes and things like that, they have a massive impact. If you've ever looked at things like the fashion and textile industry, you'll know that clothing has a huge impact. So it's a really big area that, like, it's an important area to focus on. If you can use natural materials, so things like cotton and wool and linen, rather than like polyesters and things, then that's always going to be best, like long term, in terms of like environmentally, those are things that will be reabsorbed back into the environment. But I'm also aware that in the arts, of course, there's a lot of materials that sort of serve a good purpose for us, like they're really shiny or they're really bright with colour, and it's a lot of the synthetics that do that and like have those qualities. So if you're in a position where you're sort of like, actually, I can't really use, you know, like sustainable materials for this, at least try to source them secondhand. That's where that like the reuse culture like just keeps coming back, because at least you don't have to get it new. You're just going to use what is already existing. And in terms of what you would do sort of after that, is that recycling in fabrics is a small but growing area, and we are very lucky in Wellington to have Little Yellow Bird, who you might be familiar with. Little Yellow Bird are a company who are, I would almost say they're pioneering recycling for clothing in New Zealand, but they recycle 100% cotton and make sure that it gets like turned back into new clothing. So they're actually located just up the road, and I do recommend that you go pay them a visit and sort of talk to them about the work that they do. But yeah, they're really cool and sort of an example of a New Zealand company who are trying to make it more possible for us to lower our impact from materials. In terms of yeah, actually, no, that's what I had for that point. What I will just add as well is I did really just for fun. I found this website here called the Future Materials Bank, and it's really cool. It's got over 300 different materials that are like kind of new and up and coming, not necessarily available in New Zealand, but I thought even as a place to go just to like, you know, get your brains ticking around what materials you can use and what purpose they might serve, might just be a really cool place to have a look and see what, you know, innovation is coming through in the space, particularly for clothing materials. It's really important that we sort of are on the outlook for that. The next thing I will go into is cosmetic chemicals. So another big part to costumes, of course, as you'll be aware, is things like makeup. Makeup and gels for your hair, those sorts of things. And of course the thing that we have there is like the chemicals themselves, yes, they have an impact. I won't get into that today because that's like a whole other topic. But what I will say is that a lot of them come in plastic wrap, and so what we should also be on the lookout for is trying to find makeup that doesn't come in plastic. Etique has just released, they don't actually do like cosmetics like foundations and things yet, I'm hoping, but they have just released this line of lipsticks which come in home compostable packaging, which is really, really cool. So having a think about reducing the impact that the chemicals have as well, or the cosmetics that we use. Number 4, this comes back to the idea of design again. So, and you'll see that theme popping up throughout today. Essentially what I've got here is the idea that when you make something like a set, it's usually quite big, try to consider what it is you're using to join different parts together. In this, what we call the circular economy space, we really want to start thinking about how we can make materials recoverable. So if you're using lots of different types of materials, some will be recyclable, some maybe not, and you want to be able to separate the materials so that you can then, you know, send them to the correct place rather than having them all have to go to landfill. That in itself makes a really big difference, but that idea comes from the design phase when you're thinking about creating a set or a costume or using any materials for arts or anything. So, I mean, I've said use reversible joinery here, but really what I'm just trying to get at is to think about how do we make and design products in a way that I can recover those materials. And it's not just waste at the end of its life, it's like resources. Like we can use them for other things and they'll have a value that remains. That's the thing we want to focus on. And then finally, repair and repurpose. So of course, if something does break, and you know, things break a lot, then you know, think about how can we get it repaired and how can we otherwise repurpose it into something else, whether that's in the arts community or whether that's outside the arts community. There's so many different ways, and I mean, you guys are going to be way more creative than I am, like, trust me. So there's loads of different ways that you can do that, but that's something else to be aware of. Giving yourself the skills to repair as well is really important. Like, you know, learn some of the skills like sewing and like things like that to be able to do that yourself. But the repair community itself in New Zealand is growing a lot. We actually run monthly Just Sew sessions where we people can come in and bring like sewing and things that they want touched up here at the Trust. We do that once a month on Saturdays, and then we've also paired up with Hopper Home, who once every 3 months we can do like more general fix-ups, so like broken appliances. We get a lot of toasters, and we can do that as well. So that's a growing area. You might even be familiar that places like Europe are considering new laws like the right to repair, where they're looking at changing up how we make products to make it like more accessible. So all this really good change is happening, and so you should be on the lookout for ways that you can repair as well. And that gets me to our third and sort of final influencer section, which is travel and accommodation. This is another really big area in terms of like footprint for the arts, and that's mostly because a lot of the arts is really involved in having an audience. And I mentioned before, like audience we often associate as being lots of people kind of sitting at seats watching, but also that could be, as I say, like an audience online, like a social media audience, or people walking through a gallery or whatever it is, your communicators, your storytellers, and so like your audience is the people who are hearing that story. So when you look at the impact that can be had, a lot of it comes from the sort of travel and accommodation associated with the people that you speak to. And these two here, one of them was the footprint of a tour. I think this was actually a Coldplay, so again, a pretty big impact. But just looking at where their carbon footprint was, it came from venues. Oh, whoopsie daisies. It came from venues and audience travel, and then a couple of other things here. And similarly, this was the footprint of a film that was on skiing. And you can see air travel. I know it's a little bit small on my screen here, but air travel makes up the bulk. But then if you actually look at like these blocks here, this is also like train, bus and taxi and car. So a good like 2/3 just came from travel for the impact there. So a really important thing to consider. So what could that look like then? Again, it comes down to thinking about what type of transport you're using and really trying to encourage the use of public transports and active forms of transport. Just as sort of like the key things. And again, thinking about how do we make that accessible for people. If you're a bit further afield, you're coming from Auckland or you're going away somewhere, especially overseas, where flights might be unavoidable, try and make them direct. Flights, in terms of their emissions, most of the emissions comes from the landing and takeoff. So the flight itself, you're pretty much just gliding on air. But if you can make your flights direct, it means that you're just reducing the amount of emissions that are being produced in that process. And the other thing is to get creative. Partner with companies to sort of find ways to incentivize your audience to take up public transport or other active transport options. So for example, maybe you could, see if Lime Scooters are willing to give a deal to anyone who can, be given a code that they know you're going to this certain event and, they want to zip around on something that's electric. That would be kind of nice. And it's kind of fun as well, just for the audience to hear that that's sort of an option. It gets them thinking, how can I do this and what will I be doing afterwards and all that sort of thing. The accommodation component, it's really similar to some of the things that I discussed in the venues section. And so there is a lot of overlap really between them, like the things that you could be looking out for. So what I'll just say here is that have a look for venues and accommodation that provides some form of transparency around what they're doing in sustainability. So looking for places that have a sustainability policy, maybe giving like transparent examples of what they're doing. So for example, if you're staying at a hotel, are they, or you're in backpackers, are they providing like soap in plastic packaging, or are they just providing it as a pump on the wall? Things like that are sort of like initiatives for them, but they still tell you that there's thought going into there, and that maybe that will continue to get better over time. And that brings me to communicating for sustainability. Because, as I mentioned, all of the things that we've discussed so far are obviously relevant for yourselves as organisers, as performers, as like all of that sort of thing, but then also as an audience. So this is our final segment for today, is communicating for sustainability. And this is where I would like to start, is talking about having a vision and creating a vision of what sustainability means to you. So, what we normally say to businesses is that about 87% of people are really keen to hear what you're doing in sustainability, particularly for companies, but I think it's very similar in terms of broadly, like we want to know what organisations and what groups are doing in sustainability. It's really, really common. That number's like increasing. And so, this is your opportunity to be educators, and this is your opportunity to inform people of ideas that they can undertake. You're already going to be in communication with them if they're coming to a show or an event, so you may as well sort of use it to say, hey, like we have a stance on this, we want to encourage you to have a stance on this, and that's really what you're used to doing a lot of anyway, is being storytellers and being communicators, sort of as I mentioned. And so you're part of changing mindsets. This is not me trying to pit these two against each other, by the way. But this is an example from the Leeds Festival and then the Vegan Campout, both in the UK. And as you can see, Leeds Festival had like a whole lot of rubbish and tents and all sorts of things left behind. Vegan Campout, very, very different. The primary point that I want to make between that is really to do more with your role in changing mindsets, like your role in getting people to think about the impact they're having and then actually wanting to like act on that, so that they're not just sort of doing the thing of like leaving all of this rubbish behind, but actually thinking, oh, I am going to have an impact, and like how can I reduce that? It's really important. Creating a vision, though, is part of that process, because a vision, although it might change over time, like if you're sort of thinking about, you know, what your vision for an event might look like, it might change over time. You might trial different things in sustainability and find some work and some don't. And so that might change, but the core values behind it won't change. Like the reason that you're getting behind sustainability won't change. Like you have sort of a purpose in it. You sort of will think, oh, well, I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do, but also like I really care about the environment. I want to be more connected to the environment. And maybe you want other people to be more connected to the environment too. And that forms your why, like that forms the why you're doing it. But when we look at things like human behaviour, a little bit of psychology going on, the why component is really what actually changes behaviour. Like when you decide for yourself what something means to you, that's actually the thing that pushes you to change your behaviour. And so when you are communicating and when you are going to be communicating about sustainability, this is why we say it's really important to have a vision, and it's really important to sort of be willing to share that and be willing to share what that why looks like. That's where you'll start having that initial impact. Yeah, so the quote here being, a vision is the why we're doing this, which is important for people to take on new behaviours and ideas.
Have you encountered in your work, like lots of businesses and organisations kind of overstating that kind of stuff and like greenwashing their practices hard? Because I feel like there's also money to be had in looking sustainable, so a lot of like corporations are jumping on that bandwagon.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. So I guess I should say there's a difference between like communicating what sustainability means to you and an action that you're taking to be sustainable, if that makes sense. And the latter is where people like get, you know, sort of caught up in the greenwash and don't really know what they're doing. There are also, admittedly, like we've also spoken to a lot of businesses who have done something genuinely well-meaningly, and it sort of has come across as greenwash because they just didn't know that something was wrong with what they were doing. And it's sort of, I think some of the conversation that we're seeing around that is actually moving faster than I think I anticipated, as in like people are sort of realising that a lot more, and I think are sort of almost skipping the stage of greenwash, like they're actually trying to like do things properly from the get-go, or they're just lagging behind. There's sort of both boats going on. But yes, absolutely, yeah, it's important to make sure that's meaningful. But hence, I say like it's important to actually revisit what sustainability means to you and what it looks like.
Generally suspicious, I'm like,
Yeah, I actually was on the phone to someone yesterday who pretty much said that they were a little bit sceptical about, sorry, this is my colleague who's just taking some photos for me, who pretty much said like they're quite sceptical of people doing exactly that, like why do we share the story when it should just be normal? But the reality is, like, we've got a lot of people to deal with, and a lot of people who, coming back to that psychology again, act when other people act. We're very good at copying others, and people do start to think about it more when they can see that everyone else is doing it. And I think that's really where the impact there is to be had. It's a little bit of a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because you do want people doing it genuinely, but at the same time, you know, if you say don't communicate it because it's not genuine anymore. Yes, yeah, that's true. Yeah, but very valid. Yeah. So yes, but that it does bring me to the end of so communicating your vision. So I'm going to come back to what that means in terms of communicating with the audience, but just for now I'm going to quickly pop in with things to consider when you are communicating more with the organisers, so like more as a group or your team, whatever that looks like for you. First thing, we do say have a sustainability champion. Now, of course, I don't want to take away from the importance that, you know, we all should be on board with sustainability. You want everybody doing it. But the only reason that we do say this is because we see, generally speaking, that people are more effective when you have a sustainability champion because you're giving sustainability an active voice. It's someone who's actually dedicated to it, make sure that it comes up in every conversation where it otherwise may fall off. And again, it's one of those things that's like, oh, you shouldn't just like pay someone or like have someone just doing it as like a side. And its effectiveness depends on some of the other points that I've got in here, which I'll also get back to. But we do recommend, you know, have someone who is accountable for keeping sustainability, you know, up and coming, and we're thinking about it. The same way that we can, you know, consider health and safety. Like there's always someone who's involved and there's always someone thinking about it. Number 2, communicate really clear information. So communicate with your team, like why are you wanting to do sustainability, similar to what I said before. But also, like what that strategy might look like, and try to keep information that you might be giving out about sustainability to really trusted sources, just so that people can go away and have a look at different aspects to it, maybe some of the different facts you might want to share or any of that good stuff. So yeah, communicate your nice, clear information. 3, engage your volleys. So obviously, like it takes a massive team to like pull anything together, whether it's a show or a gallery or whatever it is. And so what I do say is, poll people involved for ideas and inspiration and the things that they're passionate about and the things that they're like, oh yeah, I'm really keen for like waste minimisation or like carbon reduction or whatever that looks like. A lot of them will have connections or experience that they can bring to it, especially nowadays. Like we're just seeing that more and more and more, where people are like actually connecting with sustainability ideas who aren't necessarily in sustainability roles. And so you can sort of get a lot from that as well. Coming back, so I said earlier, I'll come back to this, management backing is really important. This is particularly the case for that we see a lot of in organisations, but management backing is the thing that's going to get you resourced. And I hate to say it, but sustainability still requires resource. Whether that's because it's going to cost a little bit of money or time, it's really important that you know it's valued. And when you hear that from higher level management, that's usually the thing that you're like, oh cool, I can go away and do this. Whereas otherwise, like you're left kind of thinking, oh, I've got to compete with my normal task, and then it just falls to your own back burner, even when you don't want it to, because we're all time poor these days. So management backing is a really, really important one. And then finally, share your progress. So make sure the team know that your impact is being had. Of course, you can only do that if you're measuring. So the other thing, I haven't included it in today, but the other thing we do recommend is to find ways to measure and keep up to date with the impact you're having. But when you do know, make sure that you're sharing it. Let people know that actually, the thoughts around it and the conversations that are being had are actually having an impact. That's really, really important, just to sort of keep that morale going and keep thinking, oh, okay, it is actually working. And then coming back to number 3, so effective communication with your audience. First one here, know your audience. And what I mean by that is we have these 3 types that we usually sort of categorise people into. You've got your converted, you've got your unconverted, and you've got your believers. In any sort of situation, you can take a group of people and there'll be some people in sort of any of these categories. And what these mean are converted is people who are already on board with sustainability. They're the people who will make the sacrifices to improve sustainability initiatives, and they're already like doing everything that they can to be living the green life that they want to live. The believers are kind of the people who are like, yes, I appreciate this is a really big problem. I would love to be on board. If you make it easy for me, I will be on board. But maybe they've got bigger fish to fry. Like maybe they are actually just really, really time poor, and they're just like, oh, okay, not today because I've got other things to do. I've got like, family to feed and that sort of thing. And then you've got your unconverted, who really are, either they don't think it's a problem, or even if they do, they're just not willing to change. And so knowing, who your audience is more likely to be, though, is going to make a big difference to what you're going to communicate with them, right? Like people who are already converted, you're probably going to say different things to if it was someone who needs a bit more empathy and needs a bit more like, we know you're doing your best, like, don't feel bad, like I appreciate that you've got all these other things on your plate. And so actually sort of thinking about, oh, well, who am I speaking to? Especially if you are trying to get a message out there as communicators and as storytellers, like you might be targeting people who are in a different boat to you, intentionally maybe. But then in terms of sustainability, have a think about what that means for them too. Number 2, I've sort of said this a few times, but use your opportunity to be, talking to so many people to communicate your sustainability tips. Put things in your newsletters that you might send out, any sort of dedicated sustainability emails, social media comms, all that stuff are all opportunities that you can say, hey, here's an idea for this day, or here's an idea to consider like using this new material I found, or whatever that looks like. But use your channels to share what you're doing and what you can do for sustainability. And then finally, I just want to finish by saying keep communication consistent. So when you are speaking to your audience, you'll have the lead up, for example, to an event or whatever that looks like. you'll be communicating a whole lot of stuff there, but then on the day, make sure that the things you communicate on the day align with that. Simple example, if you tell people, hey, we're going to have organics bins, so make sure you use them on the day. Have really well signposted organics bins so that people can actually see them, and they will really clearly be like, oh cool, they do have it. And people say that doing that is more about, I don't know, consistency and just making sure that they can see it. But it's also a little bit about coming back to human behaviour as well. Like, it does actually reinforce it if they've been seeing a message and then they act on the message because it was well communicated. Then they're still going to reinforce that for next time, and they might have a different expectation for next time and things like that. So really good one to consider as well. So what? Okay, so now it is our little workshop activity time. And I'm just going to quickly check something. Yeah, cool. So, sweet, we're running just sort of ahead of where I want to be, which is good. I've sort of rushed through. But that leaves us more time for this exercise. So I'd like you to take a post-it note, and I'll pass around some pens, although some of you I can see do have some pens, but just take a pen if you don't have one. And what I want you to write on the sticky note is two things. I would like you to write what your most recent role has been in the art space. So that can be anything, literally, like whether you performed at an event and you want to call yourself a performer, or whether that's a formal role that you might have, like an AV technician or something. What's your most recent role that you've had in the arts? And what is one sustainability challenge that you've encountered in that area? So two things to write down: what is your most recent role in the arts, and what is one challenge that you've encountered in sustainability in that area? Is discuss what the role that you're now looking at, like what could you do in sustainability for that role, and discuss that with the person that you're now going to team up with. So this is some of the resources that I've read recently. You'll recognise the Green Theatre book. And there's a few others there that are really, really cool. This is the one that I got the stuff about the lighting from, where it sort of had mentioned like some ideas and how much like carbon emissions roughly they produce. Keeping in mind a lot of this is for the UK. Really struggled to find things from New Zealand context, but hopefully there'll be some good stuff in there as well. Judy's Bicycle Sustainable Production Guide was really cool. Like, there's some really good stuff in there, just like really nicely outlined and easy to read. And then just like broadly, more generally, and in New Zealand, I've got some more here as well. You may already be familiar with a lot of these, like Wasteman's, Rubbish Trip, are really, really good resources for like waste reduction and ideas around like areas that you can do. They have got so many resources. I definitely recommend Wasteman's and the Rubbish Trip in particular. They're really, really good. But I will make sure that these get out hopefully to the attendees. So hopefully I can speak to Anna about making that happen and make sure that you've got all that on there. But otherwise, thank you so much for coming along. And you are totally welcome to stay and chat until about 4:30, and then I have to kick you out. But yeah, definitely thanks so much for coming along and for having me chat with you.